What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. Today we're going over the biggest reason why people do not win their fantasy football championships. Yes, you need to fully take your scoring format into account. You need to understand how your roster settings are going to impact value. You need to play the ADP game as much as possible to get as much value as you can. And you need a little bit of luck as well. But I would say like 60 to 70, maybe 75% of your league mates are already going to do that. And so you can certainly gain an edge by being smart when you draft, but that's not enough to really elevate your chance of winning the championship. The reason it seems like people in your league just get lucky more often is because they're putting themselves in position to dominate when they do get lucky. If you draft Trevor Lawrence this season, then you might get lucky, right? You might run into the best season of his career. But in doing so, you're still only going to land a mid to low end quarterback one, which will return slightly better than streaming value, but not enough to make a true difference. Brock Purdy last season was a quarterback 20 by ADP, finished 8th. That's amazing value, right? But teams that drafted him and then kept him over the entire season actually saw a 1% lower championship rate than average. CJ Stroud was the same way. Kind of unfair to include his championship numbers because he got hurt in the playoffs, so we're going to throw that out. But even being drafted 27th and finishing 10th in points per game, he increased playoff rate by 2%. Who are the real league winners? The people who actually made a difference in winning a championship? Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. They boosted championship rate by 62%, 58%, and 46% respectively. And it wasn't just last season. In 2022, only 4 quarterbacks boosted championship rate: Hurts, Mahomes, Allen, and Burrow. They finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in points per game. So I know it'll feel really nice. If you go out there, you draft Trevor Lawrence, he hits the ceiling that you think that he has. He finishes, 7th, 8th, 9th in points per game. But in all likelihood, that would either have a neutral or a negative impact to your championship rate. And it's not just the quarterback position. Take a look at running back. 4 true league winners at the running back position last season. Zamir White, because people picked him up for free right before the playoffs started. Everyone was starting him. He goes as the running back 8 in the fantasy playoffs. Of course, if you get the running back 8 for free right before the playoffs, that's going to boost championship, right? But when we look at the other 3, it's McCaffrey, it's Kyren Williams, and it's Breece Hall. At wide receiver, league winners were Lamb, Puka, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Mike Evans. At tight end, really just Laporta, but maybe you could throw Evan Ingram in there as well. Basically, if you don't finish as a top 10 skill player or a top 5 quarterback, then the only other way you're going to be a league winner is if, you pull a Zamir White, right? You provide low-end running back 1 value in the fantasy playoffs for free, right? So if that's the case, if everyone besides league winners are basically just fillers, even players who have pretty decent seasons are really only providing a very marginal positive or negative impact to your team. And it truly just is, like 10 to 12 league winners that really are the reason why people win. If that's the case, then why would we not be targeting league winners with every single pick? Why would you play it safe and draft a player that you're pretty sure will return value or you're pretty sure will exceed value, but they don't have the ceiling to be a top 5, top 7 running back, top 5, top 7 wide receiver, a top 3 quarterback? If they're not going to win you anything, the best that's going to happen is that they're just a filler. They don't positively or negatively impact your team, but you're just losing an opportunity to draft someone who will. We can't be the Arthur Smith of fantasy managers here, right? Someone who would rather squeak into the playoffs and then just get absolutely annihilated instead of maybe missing the playoffs, maybe taking on a little bit more risk, but opening up a path to having a super team, thus greatly increasing your odds of actually winning a championship, which is really all that matters. So today, I'm going to go over my pick for what I think the biggest potential league winner is at each position. These players absolutely all have lower floors, but they also have a path to being someone that could single-handedly increase your chance of winning a championship by 50 or 60%. And you know what? If they happen to bust, you have the waiver wire. You have a bench. You have the trade market. We're in the first inning when we have our fantasy drafts, right? When we leave the fantasy draft, we're in the first inning. I would rather strike out in the first inning, knowing I have multiple more at-bats if it means that I'm opening myself up to hitting a grand slam and really putting myself ahead from the jump. So now that we all have our upside caps on, who should we be going after at each position? We'll start off with running back, where my pick for the biggest league winner is DeVon Achane. Achane has a chance to have just like a peak Chris Johnson season, like getting him in the second round in 100% of drafts, right? So this is not someone who ever squeaks into round 1. Occasionally you can get him in round 3. I saw one of the subscribers post in the Discord, got him in the late 3rd round in a hometown league the other day. That value is absolutely insane. He led all running backs by a mile in percent of snaps lined up as a wide receiver last season. We always talk about that, right? It's like, ooh, you know, in practice, they're lining him up in the slot. And then it basically never happens. Running backs never actually line up in the slot, line up a wide receiver, unless they're DeVon Achane, unless you're on the Miami Dolphins where they're like, oh, wait, this actually makes a ton of sense to put this kid out there who's got extreme speed. And if we do get him the ball downfield, he's a running back as well. They did it last season. The snaps are going to go up. This preseason, they featured him in the receiving game when he played. He didn't play a ton because they didn't need him to play a ton. But when he was out there, he was featured in the receiving game. People's biggest argument against Achane is the efficiency. But it's wild because that's like the biggest argument for him. That's his biggest bull case. Fantasy Points looked at all the players who had just like insanely efficient rookie seasons in terms of fantasy points over expected. That's a metric we look at a lot of time, especially with the trade video in season. We're trying to figure out who's getting lucky, who's getting unlucky, right? If you have way more actual fantasy points than what you're expected, you're being highly efficient. Maybe at times you're like, okay, maybe that player is getting a little bit lucky. Maybe they're going to reduce, you know, their fantasy points per game. Opposite end, it's like, okay, this person's getting extreme volume, but they're not doing anything with it. Maybe luck will turn in their favor. But we have to be careful because it's like typically good players get lucky in fantasy points over expectation. Bad players get unlucky. Many times you've got these insanely efficient players, right? They're just really good at football, or they're in extraordinarily good situations. And the study found that 100% of running backs that were in Achane's bucket of efficiency saw significant increases to their volume in year 2, which makes sense, right? When you're averaging 7.8 yards per carry, possessing 99th percentile speed, it's a pretty easy decision to give a player like that a couple more touches per game, right? And when I say that, you know, people are like, okay, injuries, right? If he gets more touches, he can get injured. Sure, but what, would you rather him have 8 touches per game? Like, we're going to draft an entire team of people who are getting 8 to 10 touches, being like, no one's going to get hurt, but it's like, okay, but no one's doing anything either. People have looked at this at like McCaffrey. They're like, oh, well, I can't go after McCaffrey. He gets all these touches. He might get hurt. He gets all these touches. You'll want McCaffrey. It's okay taking on that injury risk for someone who's going to get a ton of touches and be highly efficient with them, because sure, they could get hurt, but if they don't, they're going to absolutely break fantasy scoring. I think that's the case with Achane this season. He has 2,000 yards, 20 touchdowns in his range of outcomes. I don't think people are prepared for how involved he'll be in the receiving game. And if you do out projections, he doesn't need to have that many touches. Like, it's not like we even need to project him for like half of the carries. Like, if you project him for like 40% of the team's carries, he's dropping a nuke. If you project him for like a 9 or 10% target share, he's dropping a nuke. Like, it's not that hard to get there with DeVon Achane in his projection. And what if he actually does get half the carries? What if he actually does go out there and have an 11, 12% target share? He can rack up those yards. If they use him at all in the red zone this season, he could be the one, not Mostert, getting 20 touchdowns. I like Mostert. I like Jalen Wright. We still need to recognize that Mostert's 32 years old. Jalen Wright is a rookie. And remember, like, Achane doesn't need 25 touches per game to have a top 3 season. He was the running back 4 in points per game last season, despite having over 20 touches 1 time, over 12 touches 3 times. He could be the running back 1 overall on less than 20 touches per game, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Amazing pick in round 2. And if you can get him in round 3, even better. Our second league winner is Cooper Kupp. Kupp was the wide receiver 1 by a mile in 2021. He commanded 191 targets, came down with 145 receptions, 1,947 yards, 16 touchdowns. Then he was on pace to again be a league winner for the second year in a row in 2022, on pace for 153 receptions this time, 1,728 yards, 13 touchdowns. has high ankle sprain. Probably could have returned late in the season, but they stunk. Stafford was also hurt, and they're like, why would we bring you back? We're not going to make the playoffs. Anyways, then last season, wasn't healthy at any point. He got hurt in the preseason. He had other injuries in season. At no point last season was he 100%, and even close to 100%, really. I mean, McVay has talked a lot about how, like, people truly don't understand how injured he was for the entire season. He still had 7+ receptions and over 110 yards in 4 of 12 games. While being injured the whole time, he commanded 8 targets per game. When healthy, Cooper Kupp has been the most valuable player across all positions in fantasy over the last couple seasons, yet he doesn't go in either of the first 2 rounds in any redraft platform because people are convinced he's going to get injured or that Puka is going to take too much work. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Puka. He's very clearly a great wide receiver. He did not go off last season just because Cooper Kupp was injured. You have to be a good wide receiver to have the best rookie season ever, right? You still have to have some level of talent there, and he's obviously a good wide receiver. But are you telling me there are 15 wide receivers that are better than Cooper Kupp? Or how about this? You're telling me there are 15 wide receivers that have a better chance of finishing as the wide receiver 1 overall than Cooper Kupp, who's done so in 2 of the last 3 years on a per game basis? I do not think that is the case. Moving a little bit later, our third league winner is Dalton Kincaid. 50% of tight end breakouts happen from a year 2 tight end. It's a very difficult position to learn. That's why we talk all the time about rookie tight ends being like, I know, we like them, right? I know this guy is athletic. I know the situation is great. It's difficult to have a monster season as a rookie. I think Sam Laporta last season is probably going to throw that back a little bit. People being like, oh, well, Sam Laporta did. It's like, yeah, he had the best season ever for a rookie tight end. It's still very difficult to do so, and that's why we see such a big jump from year 1 into year 2 for tight ends. And when you can find a second-year tight end who's an amazing athlete, coming off a great rookie season, on a great offense, with relatively minimal target competition, you should be going after them in fantasy. The Bills have an almost unbelievable, like you have to like double check it and be like, really? It's that many? 317 targets from last season that are no longer on the roster, even if they lean more run heavy. That is still a ton of targets to make up. Who's going to be making them up? Curtis Samuel, who's going into year 8 and has only once had over 97 targets that he's commanded. Khalil Shakir, who's having a good camp, right? But he's not really an outside wide receiver, so he'll mostly play in the slot. I know he got some snaps on the outside, but he's not truly an outside wide receiver. Most of that is not coming into wide receiver sets. Again, having a good camp, but I need to see it with Khalil Shakir that he's actually going to command a consistent target share. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mac Hollins, probably don't need to tell you that they won't be commanding very many targets. They're going to be in the win sprint role deep downfield. And then Keon Coleman, who they're going to have out there every snap. They want to develop, but his biggest problem is that he's not ready, right? He's not like he's ready to have a role and then probably to have a red zone role and to, get targets and be their X to start the season. But he's not ready in terms of commanding targets, getting open on his own. It's going to take time for him to develop. So then you have Dalton Kincaid, who's coming off the 4th most receptions ever for rookie tight end, who's been the focal point of the passing offense over the summer, who had a massive first-team snap share in the preseason. He's going to be out there for all the snaps he can handle, and he's going to be used as a wide receiver. We always talk about that for tight end, being like, oh, he's basically just a wide receiver. Many times it's like, oh, we're talking about that like Mike Gesicki, being like, he's basically a receiver, but it's like he's also not that good, right? Dalton Kincaid is actually a very good tight end that they'll throw out there into the slot and create these huge mismatches. That's going to be awesome, right? Then you think about it, the kicker really for me for Kincaid is over 55% of the red zone targets are gone from last season. If you combine Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Mac Hollins, you get 51 receiving touchdowns across 319 games. That is a 17-week pace of 2.8 touchdowns. These are not players who command targets in the red zone. They're just simply not. And so you've got Keon Coleman, but Dalton Kincaid is going to have a huge red zone share, and that is all that held him back last season. He didn't have that many fantasy points because he scored 2 touchdowns to go along with a ton of receptions. This year, he could get both. He could have 100 receptions along with double-digit touchdowns, all wrapped in a round 5 price tag at the minimum. Like the earliest he's going is round 5. Absolutely on board with that. Then finally, at quarterback, if you've been watching the channel at all this summer, then you probably know who's coming here. Anthony Richardson. With no Jonathan Taylor, no A.D. Mitchell, and as a 21-year-old rookie, he averaged 29.9 fantasy points per 4 quarters. Then he got hurt, so no one thinks he can stay healthy, right? Because we've not seen it, right? People only look at what we have seen. People are injury prone if that's the only thing we have. People can't possibly get injured if it's the only thing we've seen, even if it's only for one season. But you know what other quarterbacks got hurt last season? Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, C.J. Stroud, Justin Herbert, Daniel Jones, Jimmy G, Kenny Pickett, Deshaun Watson, Joe Burrow, Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford. Like, that's a pretty big list, and a lot of that list is pocket passing quarterbacks who you wouldn't even hesitate and be like, oh yeah, they're not going to be injury prone. Half of the NFL got injured last season. It's a dangerous sport. Anyone can get injured. And while Richardson is objectively more likely to get injured, I'm not arguing that. He's more likely to get injured because of his play style. The upside makes it worth it. He's the single most athletic quarterback in the history of the NFL, and he's paired with the head coach in Shane Steichen, who was behind the Justin Herbert breakout season as a rookie, the Jalen Hurts year 2 breakout. If you remember back to those years, these were not locked-in prospects. There were people who liked them, but a lot of people who didn't as well. Definitely not the prospects we consider them today. Very few people actually believed Jalen Hurts was going to be as good as he is. And then Justin Herbert was about to be playing behind Tyrod Taylor before the trainer punctured his lung in week 2. And even last season, right? It's not like Minshew was that amazing, but when you lose your starting quarterback, your star running back, your wide receiver 2, and they all get injured, and you're leaning on Gardner Minshew and backups to get things done, it's pretty impressive when they basically came one play away from the playoffs. They were still the 11th highest scoring team in the league. That is fantastic coaching, and that's what the Colts have. And when you pair fantastic coaching with elevated play volume, Jonathan Taylor being back, A.D. Mitchell helping on the outside, Downs being back at some point and likely, helping more than he did last season. We're thinking maybe like a month into the season, he'll be a little bit more helpful. You add all of that to a quarterback who could legitimately run for 15, 17 touchdowns this season, has a cannon of an arm that he is more than willing to use. You unlock a ceiling that could not only be top 3, but one that could break fantasy scoring. Even last season, right? These top-end quarterbacks provided a significant edge over all of these secondary quarterbacks. And by secondary, I mean low-end quarterback 1s, a huge edge obviously over the quarterback 2s. You had that in the season where quarterback scoring wasn't crazy high. There is a world where, the quarterback 2, quarterback 3 score 22, 23, 24 points per game, and Anthony Richardson scores 27 or 28. And you're gaining this insane edge over everyone. And I know it's a small sample, but that's actually all we've seen from Anthony Richardson. He currently leads all quarterbacks in NFL history in fantasy points for 4 quarters. He leads the NFL last season in fantasy points per dropback. He did as a 21-year-old rookie with his weapons injured. The upside is obvious. He's probably not going to score 30 fantasy points per game, but if he scored 26, 27, I wouldn't be surprised at all. That is the cheat code that rushing is in fantasy. And when you've got the most athletic quarterback in NFL history running the ball, he's going to score touchdowns. He's going to bust off a few 40, 50-yard runs this season. That produces a ceiling that we're really looking for if we're trying to win a championship. So those are my picks for the biggest league winner at each position. If you want my exact rankings on every single player, you can see it on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I know a lot of you are drafting this weekend, so I highly recommend you check out the Must Draft Players article on the site. And if you're going to an in-person draft, you can either use the custom rankings if you want to use your laptop, cross players off as you go. I know a lot of people like doing that. Or you can print off the cheat sheet that's going to give you, a more condensed version of everything. You can cross off the names with the pen and paper. I know that's old school, but that's the way I do it for the in-draft leagues as well. So good luck to everyone this weekend. I'll be back with 4 more offseason videos. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and that's it. That's it for the offseason. 2 more videos after that for week 1, probably coming out Wednesday and Sunday. So if you watched this far, be sure to leave a like. It really helps me out. And then why not subscribe as well if you're new to the channel? It is completely free. That, my friends, is the end of this one. And thanks for watching.